consumers in South Africa continue to face price hikes in 2022. Many of the essentials in the food baskets, such as fuel, electricity and food, are seeing price increases. For more on this, we are joined by Mervyn from the Pietermaritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity Group. A very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for your time. We've just got breaking news in showing that despite the 0.8 percentage point decrease in the first quarter of the year, the unemployment rate in this country remains at an alarming rate, which speaks to 7.9 million people still jobless. What's your reaction?
Yes, I mean, any additional one, good afternoon, Mpho, and thank you for having us on. But every additional job that is being found, of course, is good news for some South African. But the fact that we are still at 34% unemployment rate really makes us one of the highest in the levels of unemployment in the world. And therefore, we have to start doing job creation. It is an economic imperative now.
Absolutely. And as we speak about the impact, perhaps, of these numbers and what it means to the ordinary South African on the ground, your group has conducted and released the latest food price data, which speaks to many elements on how much South Africans are carrying on their shoulders, the fuel price, the food prices. What were some of the findings of that study?
So we released our Household Affordability Index this morning, and which is the May 2022 index, and our basket now stands at 4,609 rand and 89 cents. This is an increase of about 67 rand over last month, and a 472 rand increase over the past year. We have also seen different kinds of foods spike massively over the last few months, if I might mention some of them. So cake flour has increased by about 13%. We've seen cooking oil increase by a whopping 52% year on year. We have seen bread increase by 10%. We have seen tinned pilchards increase by 13%, margarine by 15%, bologna by 36%. And so it just continues one after the other. And these increases are being driven by both global geopolitical factors as well as local factors.
As you make mention of your food basket, I mean, you speak to flour, cooking oil, polony, apples and chicken livers. As you considered what should the food basket entail, what were you specifically looking at in terms of living standard measures?
So the few things we look at, of course, is this basket of 44 very basic foods that women tell us they buy or they try to purchase at the end of each month. So that's what we track. Then we also look at the price of, at the level of wages, and we look at the national minimum wage. Now, the national minimum wage, for those who are lucky enough to have a job, would have brought in something in the region of 3,700. About 50% of South Africans earn at that level or less. So when you compare just the wage versus this basket of food, we will see that even if a wage earner earned a full wage, the national minimum wage, they would not have been able to afford this basket of food. And we also know that South Africans have to prioritize transport, they have to prioritize electricity, debt servicing, and only then food becomes important. So you can see how stressed the South African consumer is at this particular point in history.
So with this basket now out and these numbers pointing to, you made mention of a 60 rand or so increase from just last month to a new month. What does it mean for the general household? What are some of the sacrifices that will need to be made, and perhaps considerations when it comes to food?
And so women tell us that, of course, they try very hard to try and get whatever the specials are. We also know that some retail stores are trying buffer at least their consumers by presenting various kind of combos of staple foods. But by and large, households are telling us that they are cutting back on the amount of food they eat. So they're cutting out various meals. And number two, they are choosing deliberately to go for cheaper quality food. Now, we know that both those kind of survival strategies are bad from a health position and are bad also from the position of our socio-economic development for the country.
Absolutely. Really speaking to some pressing concerns. What do you imagine to be some of the solutions? I mean, you mentioned some of the contributing factors, speaking to the Ukraine-Russia conflict, as well as perhaps the KwaZulu-Natal, the flooding also weighing in heavily on the overall food basket. What happens now?
So really what we are asking for in this month's index is for a general conversation that draws in government to ask ourselves to what extent can we carry this level of exposure of the South African economy to global conflicts. So Russia, Ukraine, it's very far away from our border and we suffer the consequence. COVID-19 locked down the world, our food security insecurity increase. We are going to have to ask, how do we build resilience in the South African economy and build our national reserves so that we can begin to put some of these reserves into play when the price of food is so volatile, and thereby bring down some of these massive food price increases.
And when it comes, very lastly, to Durban residents specifically, I mean, you make mention in your report here that Durban is one of the major areas that have been heavily affected by this increasing food basket.
Yes. The food basket in Durban, or the Durban's food basket in our composite food basket, increased by about 13.6% year on year. And much of that had to do with, for instance, some of the looting that happened in July last year, and businesses trying to recover from that and having to of course, increase the costs of goods and services, as well as some of the unseasonable weather we have had, not only the last flood, but also in December. And so fresh produce, so potatoes and butternut and onions in the Durban area is costing much more than it does in other parts of the country.
And perhaps this is the last question. The impact on general households, you've spoken to that part, but when it comes to encouraging perhaps homes to source alternative foods, perhaps growing gardens and so forth, what are some of the challenges that come with that, and also some of the highs of growing your own food and trying to live off that too?
So it is important for us to remember that South Africans tend to purchase most of their food from the supermarket, hence the importance of tracking prices. But it's become clear that actually we should begin to also enter into growing whatever kinds of foods we can grow for ourselves. It will require a kind of a cultural shift and a behavior shift for South African households, but it is an important one that we should encourage. Of course, water remains a constraint, fencing remains a constraint for many households, but the more food we can grow for ourselves, in fact, that is one way in which we can cushion the buffer. But it is important for us to remember as a country that there is a direct connection between household food security and societal stability. And so when we see, for instance, food prices increasing at the levels it is now, and the level of household food insecurity that we are seeing now, then the risk of social instability increases massively. And that should be an area of concern for government and an area of concern for all of us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for weighing in on this discussion, Mervyn Abrams, Pietermaritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity Group's program coordinator, speaking to the recently released latest food price data that reveals that the food basket is not getting any cheaper.